Hey there, Grumpy Old Fart here. I'm doing an advanced Dungeons & Dragons advice video when the group is short-handed. Before I get into this, though, if you enjoy my content, it would really help me out if you could hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, share my content on all of your platforms, and post a comment or two. Remember, I welcome your comments, even if you disagree with me. And check me out over on Rumble for my political commentary and weekly current events. If you enjoy a good book, check out my author page on Amazon.com. My pen name is H.L. Anderson. You can find all of my books there, including the tabletop role-playing game, Outlaw Trails. It's role-play in the Old West. I designed it to be as simple as possible so that the game is free-flowing and fast-paced. It's role-playing in a Western. You get to be a gunfighter or an outlaw or a bounty hunter. You get to go on cattle drives. Anything you could do in the Old West, it's in this book. So yeah. Hope you get it. Hope you enjoy it. Okay. As a dungeon master, your job is a balancing act. You have to determine exactly what your players are capable of with their characters and figure out the exact balance of monsters and villains to give them a nice challenge without overpowering them. If you overpower them, you run the risk of an unwarranted total party kill. This will earn you the reputation of a killer dungeon master. If you make the opposition too wimpy, the player characters will slaughter them without effort and the players will become bored. Balancing all of this is a serious chore and may very well be the most important thing you can do as a dungeon master. If you do manage to perfectly balance those factors, there will inevitably be a point in the game when one or more of your players cannot make it. Maybe there's a family emergency, maybe they have to work, maybe they're sick, maybe they're getting busy with their significant other, who knows, but life really does get in the way. Maybe they just didn't feel like playing that week. Maybe they just forgot. Check out my video on dedicated gamers. Regardless, your carefully balanced game session is now askew because the player character group is down a player. Being one player down is doable, but what happens when 2 or 3 player characters are out for the week? Your game is screwed. However, changing the number of bad guys or monsters is doable in most instances. But what if it's at a crucial junction in the game and that's not possible? All of the bad guys have to be there and 2 or 3 of your player characters are AWOL. What then? I use the ghosting system. Anytime a player cannot make the game for any reason, their player character is considered ghosting. They are present but cannot be attacked and can take no action whatsoever, even spells. Furthermore, any magic items they have are not available for the group except for healing magic items, items only, or items which are specific to the completion of the quest. You know, the magical MacGuffin which opens the mystic doorway to the villain's lair or helps them to save the world, whatever. I usually have the ghosting player character hand that item to a player character which is present. That way they can completely ghost. The player who isn't there, their character is completely ghosting. If I really think too many of the player characters are missing, I will explain to the players that they can continue on the quest as planned if they want, but I'm not responsible for their deaths. If they opt for a side quest, that's cool, because I've usually got several of them planned. But if they opt to continue on, that's on them. And if the entire group dies, any ghosting player characters also die. I make sure that the entire group understands this at the beginning of the game. That way, players who do not bother to show up have nothing to complain about. I have lost count of the number of times half the group doesn't show up and the other half says, yeah, we can continue on, we can do it. All right, that's on them. The rest of them are ghosting. You understand that, right? Yeah, no problem, And they all die. And all the ghosting player characters die. And then the guy shows up next week after not contacting me for that 2-week period. He shows up next week. Yeah, I was busy. I had stuff to do. Well, sorry. We're all making up new characters. What do you want to run? But I love that character. Well, you should have showed up and played. It's not my fault. You understood the rules when we started. But if somebody calls and says, well, I have to work, or my mom's in the hospital or whatever, a real excuse. I show some leeway there. And I explain to the other players, look, if you die, these people die too. And that guy, his mom's in the hospital or whatever. That guy had to work. He couldn't be here. I'm a little more lenient with that. But if they don't contact me for 2 weeks and their ghosting characters died because the rest of the player characters were wiped out, guess what? That's not my fault. Okay. I gave the players that were there the option and they opted to continue on. Nothing I can do about that. Or they went on a side quest and died, because that's possible too. Again, I'm not I don't like killing off player characters, but by the same token, if they do something stupid, or if they don't bother to show up and they don't contact me for the whole time period or whatever, or my favorite one was the guy who didn't bother to show up for 6 months and his character's been ghosting this whole time. And then he shows up and says, yeah, I'm ready to play. Well, you're 3rd level and everybody else is 8th. What? But that's not fair. It's perfectly fair. But we're going up against a lich. Well, you should have been here. Sorry, not my fault. That kind of thing. Yeah. Ghosting is a wonderful way, and it keeps the party together, but there's a downside, and the downside is everybody could die. So, yeah. Anybody else has any other ideas or a better system, stick it in there. I'm not perfect, but that's the system I've used for decades, and it works. So there you go. Hope this finds everybody well. You folks have a good one. God bless one and all.